There are two kinds of mothers in this world. The ones who pour into their kids and the ones who drain them dry. I spent 35 years trying to convince myself my mother was the first kind. Spoiler alert, she wasn't even close. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 35 years old. Single mom. I work as a senior project coordinator at a regional construction supply company outside Greenville, South Carolina. I make a solid living. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, but enough. Enough to keep the lights on, keep my 9-year-old son Caleb fed and happy, and enough, apparently, for my entire family to treat my checking account like their personal ATM. No PIN required. No thank you either. For 6 years, I was the quiet engine that kept my family's lifestyle running. I paid for things I was never asked to contribute to, I was never thanked for contributing to, and was never consulted about before someone assumed I'd contribute to. And I went along with it not because I was weak, but because I was busy. I had a son to raise, a career to build, a life to put back together after a divorce at 29 left me starting from absolute zero in a one-bedroom apartment with a 3-year-old who needed breakfast every morning regardless of how broken his mother felt. The first comment my mother made when I moved back home, "Well, if you'd been easier to live with, maybe he'd have stayed." She said it at the kitchen table, buttering toast like she was reading the weather. I didn't respond. I had a toddler who needed eggs and a job to start applying for, and fighting Linda before 8 a.m. felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. That became the pattern. Not out of fear. Not out of a desperate need for her approval. Out of pure logistics. Every confrontation cost time I didn't have. Writing the check was faster than hearing the lecture. And so I wrote the checks. Then I made the mistake of being generous in a big way. I planned a family vacation to Costa Rica. 2 weeks. Manuel Antonio. I booked everything. I paid for everything. My son Caleb had been counting down the days for months on a handmade chart he taped to his closet door. 4 days before our flight, my mother, Linda Mitchell, age 60, walked into my house, held up my bank card, the one I'd lent her 10 weeks earlier for what she said was an emergency, and told me I wasn't coming. "Melissa's kids don't feel comfortable around Caleb on trips," she said. Her voice was flat and rehearsed, the kind of tone you use when you've practiced a lie long enough to believe it yourself. My father Frank stood behind her, silent as a stopped clock. My son stood behind me in the hallway, holding his passport. And that bank card, the one that paid for every single seat on that plane, sat in my mother's hand like it was hers. What I did next, quietly, without drama, without a single raised voice, turned my mother's carefully constructed world upside down like a snow globe someone dropped on concrete. But before we get into that, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this whole thing really started. 6 months of planning. 6 months. That's how long I spent building this trip. Started at Christmas dinner, 7 months before the chaos. My whole family was crowded around my mother's table. Me, Caleb, my parents, my younger sister Melissa, her husband Derek, and their kids, Lily who's 11 and Jake who's 7. The food was fine. Conversation was the usual tightrope walk. Caleb had been doing a school project on Central America. That week, his class had focused on Costa Rica. He was practically bouncing at the table, tugging my sleeve, going, "Mom, did you know there are wild monkeys at the beach? Like actual wild ones you can walk next to?" Table went quiet the way it always did when Caleb got excited. My family had a particular way of dimming the volume on his enthusiasm, like someone slowly turning down a radio that was too loud for their taste. I noticed it every single time and never once said anything about it. "That's Manuel Antonio National Park," I said. "Incredible place." Caleb's eyes went wide. "Can we go? Can we actually go?" I looked around the table. My mom Linda was cutting her turkey like she was performing surgery. My dad Frank was staring at his plate. Melissa was scrolling under the table, which she always did when she wasn't the center of attention. And I said something I will never stop regretting. What if we all went together? A family trip. I'll plan it. I'll cover the flights and the resort. My mother looked up. All of it. All of it. She nodded once, exactly the way a CEO approves a quarterly budget. That nod should have been a warning sign. But I was already imagining the look on Caleb's face standing next to a wild capuchin monkey on a Costa Rican beach, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I spent the next 3 months building the trip the way I build projects at work, methodically, obsessively, with spreadsheets and tabs and comparison charts. 6 round-trip flights from Greenville-Spartanburg to Atlanta to San Jose. A 12-night stay at Casa Paraiso Resort in Manuel Antonio. Ocean view rooms. A guided tour of the national park, a zip-line excursion through the cloud forest, a cooking class where Caleb could learn to make traditional casado, a sunset catamaran cruise, a whitewater rafting afternoon for the adults. Melissa's 2 kids weren't coming. Linda had decided the flight was too long for little ones, which conveniently also meant no extra cost for me from that angle. I didn't push back. Total cost came out to $19,500. Almost every dollar I'd saved in my vacation fund over 2.5 years. The day I booked everything, Caleb made his countdown chart. 51 squares cut from construction paper, taped to his closet door. Every morning he peeled one off and announced the number at breakfast like a sports broadcaster. 43 sleeps, Mom. 29 sleeps. 14 sleeps. He was so proud of that chart. He'd drawn a little monkey in the corner holding a suitcase. Everything felt right. Everything felt like it was finally coming together. I should have paid more attention to the signs. They were never hiding. I just kept choosing not to look at them. The signs I ignored. About 8 weeks before the trip, Melissa texted me. Hey, can you forward the booking confirmation? I want to see what the resort looks like. Her kids weren't coming. But sure. I forwarded the confirmation email, the resort name, the dates, the room numbers. I left out the 6-digit booking code, not out of suspicion, just habit. I didn't think twice about it. 6 weeks out, my mom called asking for the resort's Wi-Fi password. Mom, we're not even there yet. Wi-Fi info comes at check-in. She laughed it off. Oh, of course. I just get excited. I thought nothing of it. For weeks before departure, Derek, Melissa's husband, said something at Sunday dinner that should have stopped me cold. He was passing the cornbread and said, almost under his breath, "Y'all ever think about keeping the group smaller? Less headache for everyone." I thought he was talking about Lily and Jake staying home. I smiled and changed the subject. Looking back, Derek knew exactly what was being planned. He just couldn't bring himself to tip me off directly. That's its own kind of cowardice, but I'd learn more about Derek's character before this whole thing was over. 3 weeks out, I noticed something on Instagram. Melissa posted a story of brand new luggage, a matching olive green set, the kind you see in airport lifestyle ads. She tagged Derek. The caption said, "Ready for adventure, palm tree airplane." She didn't tag me. I noticed. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It meant everything. I found out later that luggage cost $480. Charge appeared on my bank statement from a retailer called Summit Plus Shore, dated 2 weeks before the trip. My sister used my card to buy suitcases for a trip I paid for, posted them online with a smile, and didn't even blink. But the discovery that made my stomach drop happened 4 days before our flight, when my mother showed up on my porch. The visit. I was in the living room packing Caleb's carry-on. He was crouched beside me, pressing a little sticker of a sea turtle onto the front zipper pocket. He'd picked it out at a craft store. "For luck, Mom," he told me, pressing it flat with both thumbs. The knock came hard. I opened the door and there was Linda, 60 years old, standing on my porch like she was there to foreclose on it. Behind her, Frank, 63, hands buried in his jacket pockets, jaw tight, not making eye contact. Linda stepped inside without being invited. "We had a family discussion," she said. Her voice had that particular quality she used when she'd already issued a verdict and was informing me of it, not asking for input. "You won't be coming to Costa Rica. Melissa's kids aren't comfortable traveling with Caleb. This has been decided." My father reached into his jacket pocket and set something on my entryway table. My bank card. My Chase debit card with the blue stripe. The one I'd handed to my mother 10 weeks ago when she called me crying about a medical copay while her wallet was supposedly locked in Frank's car. The sea turtle sticker on Caleb's bag looked up at me from the floor. "I want you to understand what I did next and what I didn't do. I didn't cry. I didn't yell." My mother was counting on one of those two responses. She'd rehearsed her speech for both versions of me, the tearful daughter she could talk back into compliance, or the furious daughter she could call dramatic and dismiss. She was not ready for the version of me who asked questions. "Which family members decided this?" I said. She blinked. "The family. When was this discussion? Where? Was I invited to participate in a decision about my own vacation?" She stiffened. "Sarah, I'm your mother." "Then act like it," I said. "And why do you still have my bank card?" That's when her face shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. "I needed it for a few things," she said. I repeated it exactly the way she said it. "A few things." Let the words land. "After everything I've done for you," she started, and there it was, the guilt playbook. The one she'd been running on me since I was 16. "You should be grateful. You owe me. Family takes care of family." I looked at my father. For 1/2 second, just one, his eyes met mine. He had something to say. I could feel it building in him the way you feel weather pressure before a storm. Then Linda glanced at him. One look. Quick as a switch being flipped. His eyes dropped. "I need that card back," I said. "We'll deal with it later." She walked to the door. Frank set the card on the entry table, said nothing, and followed her out. Tires on gravel. Car pulled away. I stood in my living room for 30 seconds without moving. Then I picked up my phone and opened my banking app. Charges. I want you to brace yourself for this part because I sure wasn't braced. 3 months of transactions loaded onto my screen. My thumb went still. March 7th, Colby's Chop House, Gaffney, South Carolina, $214. That's the town where Melissa lives. Not my town. March 18th, Serenity Springs Day Spa. $740. I have never been to a spa in my life. April 2nd, Target. $318. April 11th, Amazon. $163. April 19th, Amazon again. $247. April 28th, boutique called Harbor and Bloom. $112. Then smaller ones scattered in between. Gas stations near Melissa's neighborhood. A nail salon. A drive-through coffee chain. A children's shoe store. Not a single charge in my zip code. $4,100. That's what my trust was worth to my mother. A spa day, some steak dinners at my sister's favorite restaurant, and a parade of Amazon boxes shipped to my sister's porch. My hands didn't shake because I was scared. They shook because my body understood what my brain hadn't fully processed yet. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Linda hadn't forgotten to return the card. She had kept it deliberately, methodically, and used it like a second income stream. I checked my email next. There, between a shipping notification and a newsletter I never unsubscribed from, was a message from Casa Paraiso Resort, Manuel Antonio. Subject line, Booking Modification Request, Status Update. I opened it. 12 days earlier, someone had called the resort and requested the removal of 2 guests from reservation number CPR 20248831. The guests they wanted removed, Sarah Mitchell and Caleb Mitchell. Caller had asked that the remaining 4 guests stay on the reservation and the room configuration be adjusted accordingly. The request was denied. Reason: only the primary account holder could authorize changes and the caller could not provide the 6-digit confirmation code. Caller had identified herself as Mrs. Melissa Wade. I set my phone down on the counter the way you set down something fragile. Slowly. Carefully. Like if you hold it too long, something inside it might break. The unauthorized charges were a gut punch. But the resort call? That was a blueprint. That was premeditation. That was my sister using her married name, calling an international resort, and trying to quietly erase me and my 9-year-old son from a vacation I had built from scratch, financed entirely, and loved from the very idea of it. This wasn't a conversation that got heated and went sideways. This was a plan. With steps. With a timeline. They hadn't decided to cut me out 4 days ago. They'd been working on it for at least 12. What Natalie said. I called my best friend Natalie Cruz at 11 a.m. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she was between clients. Natalie and I met in college. She studied psychology, I studied supply chain management, and we've been close ever since. She's a licensed family therapist now. She's also the most grounded person I know. I trust her the way I trust my own instincts, not blindly but completely. I told her everything. The doorstep visit, the card, the charges, the resort call, the 6 years of checks I'd been writing without anyone ever saying thank you. She was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," she finally said, "using someone's debit card without permission for 3 months isn't a family favor. That's fraud. It doesn't matter who she is to you." I said, "She's my mom." "Which makes it worse," Natalie said. "Not better." Then she asked me the question that I've turned over in my mind every day since. In 6 years of paying for your family, how many times did anyone stop and ask if you could afford it? I didn't have to think. Never. "That's your answer," she said. "You're not a family member to them. You're a budget line." She told me to document everything. Screenshot the resort email. Print the bank statements. Screenshot Melissa's luggage post. Save every text message where money was requested, and I said yes without blinking. Not to build a legal case necessarily, but to protect myself when my mother inevitably tried to rewrite history. "People like your mother don't remember events," Natalie said. "They remember versions. And the version she'll tell will make you the villain every single time." Before we hung up, she said, "Call your Uncle Gary. Ask him about your Aunt Susan." Susan? What does Susan have to do with any of this? Just call him. I didn't understand it yet, but I would. Phone call that changed everything. I gave my mother one chance. I want that clearly on the record. I called Linda that evening after Caleb was in bed. I kept my voice even. No heat, no tears. Just flat, direct questions. "Mom." I looked at my statements. There are charges on my card going back 3 months, a steakhouse in Gaffney, a spa day, 6 Amazon orders shipped to Melissa's address. "Did you authorize those?" Silence. Long silence. Then, "I'm your mother, Sarah." It's not stealing when it's family. I want you to pause on that sentence for a second. Really sit with it. What someone is telling you when they say that is that your money belongs to them if they decide they need it. That your boundaries are suggestions. That the word family is a master key that unlocks everything you thought was yours. "You spent over $4,000 without asking me," I said. "You make good money." Melissa doesn't. I was balancing things out. That's what mothers do. By taking from me without my knowledge. After everything I sacrificed for you and your sister, Sarah. After every. And there it was. The invoice from my childhood. Pulled from the drawer right on cue. Every conversation eventually leads there with Linda. "You owe me for existing. You owe me for being raised." I asked the only question that really mattered. Mom, did you plan to cut me from this trip before or after you started using my card? 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds on a phone call is a long time. Long enough to say a lot of things. She said nothing. This conversation is over, she said. And the line went dead. She didn't deny it. She didn't attempt to explain a timeline. She just closed the door. When someone's only response to being caught is to hang up, they've already admitted everything. Uncle Gary. I called Uncle Gary the next morning. He's Linda's younger brother, 56, retired electrician, lives about 90 minutes south in Colombia. Gary is the kind of man who means every word he says and saves them up so he has enough. I've always trusted him completely. Uncle Gary, I said. Natalie Cruz told me to ask you about Aunt Susan. He exhaled slow and long, like someone releasing a breath they'd been holding for a decade and a half. She did it to Susan too, he said. He walked me through it. 18 years ago, their sister Susan had been the family's workhorse. She covered their mother's medical bills when she got sick, paid for Christmas every year, helped Linda with rent twice when Frank was between jobs. Then Susan met a man, moved to Charlotte, and started building her own life. Started saying no. Linda couldn't accept it. She told relatives that Susan had abandoned the family. She stopped inviting her to Thanksgiving. She told people Susan didn't want to come when Susan was never even asked. She intercepted phone calls. She manufactured a narrative where Susan was the cold, selfish one who'd turned her back on everyone. Susan was shut out for 14 years. They only reconnected 3 years ago after Susan had a health scare and decided life was too short to keep letting the silence stand. Your mother doesn't love people the way most people do, Sarah, Gary said. She manages resources. And when a resource stops being useful or starts asking questions, she shuts it down or she punishes it until it falls back in line. I asked why no one had stopped her. Because everyone who tried got cut off too. Before we hung up, Gary mentioned something I hadn't heard about. Linda was planning a going-away barbecue at her house the day before our flight. Half the extended family was invited. Friends from church. Neighbors. She'd apparently been planning it for 2 weeks. She's expecting you to fold, Gary said. She thinks you're going to call and beg to be added back. She's done this before, Sarah. She always counts on the other person blinking first. I won't be blinking, I said. I know, he said. That's why I'll be there. And whatever you decide to do, I've got your back. 18 years. Same playbook. Different daughter. But this time the daughter had receipts. And a printer. The moment that decided everything. Caleb came home from school that afternoon quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack by the front door, and Caleb always hangs his backpack on the hook always, and walked into the kitchen without saying hello. Something was wrong. Hey, bud. How was your day? He shrugged. Opened the fridge. Closed it without taking anything. Caleb, what happened? He turned around and looked at me with those big brown eyes, and I knew, before he opened his mouth, that whatever he was about to say was going to be the thing that permanently ended my patience for this entire situation. Mom, do Lily and Jake actually not like me? My chest locked up. What? Grandma told me they don't want to travel with me. But Lily always plays with me at Grandma's house. She taught me that card game with the camels. She was nice. He wasn't crying. He was worse than crying. He was confused. A 9-year-old boy trying to reconcile what his grandmother told him with the evidence of his own lived experience. That is a cruel place to put a child. That is a specific kind of cruelty, the kind that uses a child's own affection against them to make them doubt what they know to be true. Listen to me, I said, getting down to his level. Lily loves hanging out with you. You know that because you've seen it with your own eyes. Grandma said something that wasn't true. Then why can't we go with them? Because you and I are going on our own trip. Just the two of us. And it is going to be the best trip of your entire life. He hugged me. I held him until I felt his breathing slow down. Then I sent him to wash his hands for dinner. And that night, after he fell asleep with his passport on the nightstand and his suitcase at the foot of his bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, a cup of cold coffee, and made 3 phone calls. When someone uses your child as a weapon, when they tell a 9-year-old that his cousins don't want to see him just to justify cutting his mother from a trip she built and paid for, you stop negotiating. You stop explaining. You act. 3 calls, 40 minutes, done. The first call was to the airline. I'd like to cancel all 6 tickets on booking reference TK447892. The agent paused. All 6, ma'am? All 6. I rebooked 2. Same flight. Same departure time. Window and middle seat. Sarah Mitchell and Caleb Mitchell. The refund for the other 4 tickets went to a new card I'd already ordered that morning after reporting the unauthorized charges on the old one. The second call was to Casa Paraiso Resort. I canceled the 3-room reservation with exactly 74 hours to spare, just inside the full refund window which I'd checked before I dialed. Then I rebooked a single room at a small boutique property called Villa Serena, a few minutes from the National Park entrance. Half the price. A private terrace with a hammock and a garden view. It looked perfect. The third call was to my bank. I reported every unauthorized charge. $4,100 across 3 months. I walked through each transaction with the fraud specialist on the line. Ma'am, these transactions were made by someone with physical possession of your card. If that person is a family member, are you still comfortable proceeding? I'm comfortable getting my money back, I said. I'm not pursuing criminal charges right now. But I want every dollar reversed and this card permanently deactivated. She processed it. 3 calls. 40 minutes total. I made a pot of tea afterward, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Teddy. I didn't cancel to punish anyone. I canceled because it was mine to cancel. There's a difference, and by tomorrow afternoon they'd all be learning it firsthand. The notifications land. The next morning, Melissa texted me 4 times before noon. 10:47 a.m. Hey, can you send the resort Wi-Fi when you get a chance? Derek wants to be able to check emails. 10:49 a.m. Also, can you spot us like $600 for spending money? Kids are going to want souvenirs and stuff. 11:06 a.m. What's the shuttle schedule from the airport to the resort? 11:22 a.m. Hello? We leave in like 2 days. Lol. She wrote, we the way you write it when you know the other person isn't included. Casual. Reflexive. She didn't even catch it. I want you to notice something. In 4 text messages, Melissa asked for Wi-Fi access, $600, and transportation logistics. She did not ask how Caleb was doing after being told his cousins didn't want to travel with him. She did not acknowledge that anything unusual had occurred. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't mention my mom's visit. That's how entitlement operates. It doesn't pretend the damage isn't there. It genuinely doesn't register that the damage exists. In Melissa's mental model, I was a service provider. And service providers don't have feelings. They have delivery timelines. I left her on read. Around 3:30 that afternoon, Melissa apparently checked her email. What she found was a cancellation confirmation from the airline. Your reservation has been canceled by the primary ticket holder. All 6 tickets on booking TK447892 have been voided. Cascade started fast. 3:48 p.m., Melissa called Linda. 3:51 p.m., Linda called Frank. 3:57 p.m., Frank called me. Voicemail. Sarah, honey, something seems to have happened with the flights. I'm sure it's just a mix-up. Please call us back when you get a chance. A mix-up. My father, who stood on my porch holding my stolen bank card while my mother told me I wasn't welcome on my own trip, Called it a mix-up. 4:14 p.m., Linda called. Voicemail. Sarah Michelle Mitchell, you call me back this instant. If you actually canceled those flights, the time limit cut her off. 4:29 p.m., the resort sent a cancellation confirmation to all guests on the original reservation. Your stay at Casa Paraiso Resort has been canceled by the primary account holder. 4:44 p.m., Melissa texted one word, seriously. 5:02 p.m., Derek texted, which surprised me. Sarah, please talk to them. This is going too far. I'd find out later that Derek already knew the whole story and had been quietly uncomfortable with it for weeks. He just hadn't done anything about it, which is its own kind of complicity. By 9 p.m. my phone had 19 missed calls. I plugged it in, turned the ringer off, and went to bed. I slept deeply and completely, the way I hadn't in months. Frank shows up alone. Frank came by the next morning at 8:15. Alone. No Linda. He stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets and a look on his face like a man who'd been carrying a heavy box for so long he'd forgotten what it was like to put it down. Can I come in? I let him in. Caleb was already at school. Early drop-off on Thursdays. Frank sat at my kitchen table and didn't touch the coffee I set in front of him for a full minute. I knew, he said. I know you knew, Dad. I saw the Amazon boxes at Melissa's house. Saw the spa receipt on the counter at home. I saw your card on Linda's nightstand, Sarah. More than once. And you didn't say anything. He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. You know how your mother is. That's not an answer, Dad. That's an excuse you've been using for 30 years. He flinched. A small tightening around the jaw. Kind of flinch you develop when you've spent decades avoiding one person's anger by absorbing everyone else's. I recognized it because I had almost become him. 6 years of writing checks without complaining. 6 years of swallowing objections and calling it keeping the peace. I was one bad year away from turning into my father, a decent man who learned helplessness so gradually he forgot he was choosing it. I'm sorry, he said. I really am. I believed him. I did. But I also know that an apology without a change is just a sound coming out of someone's mouth. Dad, I'm going to Linda's barbecue tomorrow. And I'm going to tell everyone the truth. The card, the charges, the resort call, all of it. You should be there. But I'm doing it whether you back me or not. He stood, nodded once, walked to the door. She's going to be furious, he said. She's been furious my whole life, I said. I just stopped being afraid of it. He left without another word. The night before. Linda called that evening. I picked up, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to see what her final move would be. She opened with guilt. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? I canceled a trip I paid for after being told I wasn't invited. Yes, I know exactly what I did. She shifted to threats. Something vague about what people would think, how the family would fall apart. I'll be at the barbecue tomorrow, I said. I won't cause a scene. I'll state facts. That threw her. She'd expected either an explosion or a breakdown. A calm woman with documentation wasn't in her playbook. She tried bargaining. If you rebook the flights tonight, right now, we can put this all behind us. There's nothing to put behind us, Mom. There's a pattern that's been running for 6 years, and it's going to stop. You are tearing this family apart. I'm not paying for it anymore. That's different. Silence. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking through the phone. You'll regret this, she said. And the line went dead. I looked at Caleb's suitcase sitting by the front door. Sea turtle sticker. Passport on top. His stuffed sloth he'd named Captain Noodles tucked into the side pocket. Tomorrow was the barbecue. Linda thought she was hosting a going-away party. She had no idea she was hosting a reckoning. The barbecue. The morning of the party, I printed 3 things. First, my bank statements for the past 3 months with every unauthorized charge highlighted in yellow. 13 transactions. $4,100. 1 clear, dated, attributed. Second, the email from Casa Paraiso Resort. The booking modification request with the caller identified as Mrs. Melissa Wade. Third, a single clean page summarizing every major payment I'd made to or for the Mitchell family over 6 years. $52,000 in one column, sorted by year and category. No editorializing. No emotional language. Just numbers. I put everything in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. Caleb came downstairs in his good jeans and a green polo. He looked at me. "We're still going to Grandma's barbecue?" "Yes." "And then tomorrow morning we fly to Costa Rica?" "Tomorrow morning we fly to Costa Rica." He grinned so wide I could count every tooth. He didn't know what was about to happen at that barbecue. He just knew that tomorrow there'd be monkeys. I called Natalie from the driveway. "I'm going to state facts," I told her. "That's it. No accusations. No yelling. Facts and a folder. Are you sure you want Caleb there for this? He deserves to watch his mother stand up for both of them." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay. Call me after." I checked myself in the rearview mirror. Eyes clear. Jaw set. Not nervous. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't performing the role of the grateful daughter who writes every check and says nothing. I was just a woman with receipts. What happened at that table? Linda's backyard looked like a magazine spread. String lights between the oak trees. A long table with a red and white cloth. Frank at the grill in his grill sergeant apron. Hickory smoke and marinated chicken and the smell of late summer. I counted 24 people as I came through the side gate. Uncle Gary and his wife Patty were at the far end of the table. My cousins Jordan and Becca sat with their families. 3 neighbors from the cul-de-sac. 2 women from Linda's church group, Helen and Rose, who'd been coming to our family events since I was in grade school. And this was the detail that genuinely surprised me. My co-worker and friend Marcus Webb, who I'd casually mentioned the trip to at work and who Linda had apparently tracked down and invited, possibly to add a friendly witness to her version of events. Marcus caught my eye when I walked in, gave me a look that said he had no idea what he'd walked into. Melissa saw me come in and her face cycled through 4 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise. Irritation. Calculation. Something that looked almost like fear. Linda was coming out of the kitchen with a bowl of coleslaw. She stopped mid-step. For one moment, just one, her composure cracked like a hairline fracture in glass. Then she pivoted to Helen, laughed at something nobody had said, and kept moving. Caleb ran straight to Lily. "Caleb!" She jumped off the bench and grabbed his arm. "Come look, there are fireflies by the fence." They took off together, laughing, chasing light in the grass. 2 kids who had no idea the adults in their lives had been using their names like ammunition. Uncle Gary caught my eye from across the yard and nodded once. He knew what was coming. Dinner was served at 6:30. 6:50, Linda stood at the head of the table and tapped her glass. Conversations faded. "I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight," she said, warm and polished, the voice she kept in a glass case for special occasions. "Tomorrow, the Mitchell family is heading to Costa Rica for 2 wonderful weeks. We are truly, truly blessed." Helen from church raised her lemonade. One of the neighbors clapped. Linda's neighbor Walt leaned forward. "All of you going? That must have cost a pretty penny." Linda smiled the smile of someone accepting credit they didn't earn. "Family is worth every sacrifice, Walt." She hadn't said my name once. She hadn't looked at me once. To the 24 people at that table, I was furniture. Then Patty, Gary's wife, turned to me with genuine warmth. "Sarah, you must be so excited. Costa Rica has been on my bucket list for years." Table shifted. Eyes moved toward me. Linda's fork paused over her plate. Before I could answer, Linda cut in. Fast, smooth, practiced. Actually, Sarah decided to sit this one out. Work obligations. You know how demanding her job gets. She looked right at me when she said it. Smiled. Work obligations. That was the cover story she'd built and rehearsed for 24 people. I set my water glass down slowly. Actually, I said, standing up, I'd like to clarify a few things. The yard went dead quiet. Even the fireflies seemed to pause. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. 24 people at a narrow table don't require volume. I planned this trip. Every detail of it, the flights, the resort, the excursions, the transfers, all of it. I spent 6 months building it. I paid for it entirely. 6 round-trip flights from GSP to San Jose. 12 nights at Casa Paraiso Resort. Every activity on the itinerary. The total came to $19,500. Walt set his fork down. 4 days ago, my mother came to my house and told me I wasn't invited. My father was with her, holding my bank card, the card I gave my mother 10 weeks ago for what she said was a medical emergency. She never returned it. Instead, she used it to run up $4,100 in charges over 3 months. Restaurants in Gaffney. A spa day. Amazon orders shipped to Melissa's house. I opened the manila envelope. Pulled out the highlighted bank statements. Handed them to Patty, who was closest. Patty looked down. Her expression changed like a thermometer dropping. She passed them to Jordan. Jordan passed them to Becca. Down the table they went, quiet and damning. And 12 days before our flight, I continued, someone called the resort in Costa Rica and requested that my name and my son's name be removed from the reservation. The resort denied the request because only I, as the primary account holder, could authorize changes. The caller couldn't provide the confirmation code. Every head at the table turned toward Melissa. The caller identified herself as Mrs. Melissa Wade. Melissa pulled her sunglasses off. Her face had gone from red to white and back to red. This is insane. This trip was supposed to be a family trip. Walt, who had been quiet, said simply, "But if Sarah paid for it, why wasn't she invited?" Melissa looked at Linda. Linda looked at the coleslaw bowl. Derek was motionless until he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and said quietly to no one in particular, "The flights are gone. Resort too." He looked at Melissa. "I told you this would happen. I told you 3 weeks ago." Then Gary stood up. The scraping of his chair on the concrete patio sounded like the whole yard holding its breath. "Linda," he said, "I stayed quiet about this for close to 20 years. But you did the exact same thing to Susan. Word for word. You used everything she gave, then cut her off when she stopped giving and told everyone she was the problem. I watched you shut your own sister out of this family for 14 years. And I am not going to sit here and watch you do it to your daughter." Patty said, barely above a whisper, "Linda, you ran up charges on that girl's bank card." Helen set her napkin down on the table. Deliberately. Precisely. The quiet gesture of a woman who had made a decision about what she'd seen. Rose looked at her shoes. Then Frank spoke. Quietly. But everyone heard. "She paid for all of it," he said. "Every single cent." I looked at my mother. She was still standing, but the performance was gone. The warmth, the polish, the careful smile, all of it had drained out of her face. Her hands gripped the back of her chair, not for authority anymore, but for balance. "Mom," I said. My voice was steady. I'd been practicing steady for a long time. I have spent 6 years paying for this family's expenses without ever being asked if I could afford it, without ever being thanked, and while being deliberately kept out of family decisions. Car insurance. Back-to-school shopping. Holiday groceries for dinners I hosted. Melissa's last-minute flights home. Your dental work. Your water heater. $52,000 over 6 years. I paused. And not once, not one single time, did anyone call to ask how I was doing. Linda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That stops today. I love you. I love Dad. I even love Melissa, though she makes it genuinely hard. But I will not keep funding people who treat me as a budget line. And I will never ever allow anyone to use my son as a weapon again. Telling a 9-year-old that his cousins don't want to see him to justify excluding his mother, that's not a family disagreement. That's cruelty wearing a barbecue apron. I closed the folder. Caleb, I called. He came running from the fence line. Lily half a step behind him, her hand on his sleeve. Are you going to Costa Rica? Lily asked him. He looked up at me. We are, I said. Lily turned to Melissa. Mom, can we go too? Melissa didn't answer. She was still staring at the bank statements making their way down the table. I took Caleb's hand. We walked out through the side gate, past the string lights, past the empty lawn chairs, past the grill where the chicken had started to char because nobody remembered to flip it. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Marcus Webb say something under his breath that Uncle Gary later told me was, well, I did not see that coming. What happened after we left? Gary called me at 10 that night. After we left, Linda tried to collect herself. She's being dramatic, she told the table. She'll come around. She always does. Nobody agreed. Nobody nodded. The silence that followed, Gary said, was louder than anything I'd said out loud. Jordan, my cousin who works as a paralegal in Greenville, spoke first. Aunt Linda, didn't something like this happen with Aunt Susan? Because Mom would never talk about why they stopped speaking for so long. Becca chimed in. Dad mentioned once that Susan got cut off after she stopped covering bills. The fragments started fitting together. People who'd held their own splinters of the story for years, a holiday where someone was conspicuously absent, a phone call that ended in tears, a comment overheard at Thanksgiving, started assembling them into one picture. Picture looked exactly like what Gary had described to me on the phone. A 20-year pattern of resource management disguised as motherhood. Melissa tried to redirect. She has money. We don't. It's really not complicated. Derek looked at his wife. Melissa. Stop. Just stop. It was the first time anyone at a Mitchell family gathering had ever heard Derek push back on Melissa out loud. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites relationships. Linda retreated into the kitchen. Through the window, Gary could see her standing at the sink, both hands on the counter, head bowed. Helen and Rose left without saying goodbye. Walt shook Gary's hand on the way to the parking lot and said, That young woman has more spine than anyone at that table. Then Melissa and Derek went home and opened a laptop. Last-minute flights from Greenville to San Jose with connections through Atlanta and Miami were running $2,900 per person. For 2 people, that was $5,800 before hotel, food, or anything else. They couldn't afford it. Melissa called Linda. Mom, can you help us cover at least $3,000? Linda's answer, according to what Frank later told Gary, We don't have it, Melissa. And there was the quiet truth at the center of the entire arrangement. Linda and Frank lived on Frank's pension and a little bit of savings. They didn't have $3,000. They didn't have $1,000 to spare. The only reason they'd been going to Costa Rica at all was because I was paying for it. Every piece of the entitlement, the casual contempt, the assumptions, the dismissal of the person holding the checkbook, was built on a foundation they couldn't construct themselves. Melissa's voice, according to Gary, climbed fast. You told me she'd fold. You said she always folds. You said she would never actually go through with it. I didn't think she'd go this far, Linda said. Well, she did. And now we have nothing. For the first time in their alliance, Melissa and Linda were on opposite sides of an argument. Because when the funding disappears, the loyalty has nothing left to hold it together. Derek said to Melissa what Melissa had been avoiding hearing for years. We need to stop depending on your sister for our lifestyle. We need to sit down with our actual income and build a real budget. Starting this week. Melissa hung up on Linda without responding. Funny how fast loyalty unravels when the money's gone. They weren't a team. They were two people sharing a funding source. And the funding source had closed its account. Costa Rica. Our alarm went off at 4:15 a.m. Caleb was dressed before I finished brushing my teeth. He dragged his little blue suitcase to the front door and stood there in his sneakers with his passport in one hand and Captain Noodles, the stuffed sloth, tucked under his other arm. "Mom," he said, "are we actually going?" "We're actually going, baby." The drive to the airport was quiet and dark. Caleb fell asleep 10 minutes in. His Lonely Planet Costa Rica Kids Guide sat open on his lap. I drove with the window cracked, the September air warm and thick with the smell of pine and coming rain. Check-in was smooth. 2 passengers. 2 boarding passes. Gate 14. The gate, Caleb pressed his face against the glass wall and watched the ground crew load bags onto our plane. "Mom, that one might be ours," he said, pointing at every single suitcase. He said it 12 times. I kept count. When they called our boarding group, Caleb walked down the jet bridge like he was approaching something sacred. He found our row, buckled himself in, and looked out the window with an expression I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. Pure, uncut, unguarded joy. The engines powered up. Plane taxied. Caleb reached over and grabbed my hand. "Here we go, Mom." We lifted off. Somewhere below us, my mother was probably awake in her kitchen, trying to construct a version of the last 48 hours that made her the reasonable one. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to help her build it. My phone buzzed one last time before I switched to airplane mode. "Uncle Gary, have the best trip, kid. You earned every second of it." I turned the phone off. Airplane mode. A new mode of living. Caleb opened his book. The monkeys on the cover. Costa Rica was everything the pictures promised and nothing like the trip I'd originally planned. It was better because it was ours. Villa Serena sat on a hillside above a garden, with a terrace where Caleb and I ate breakfast every single morning. Mangoes, pineapple, gallo pinto, and coffee strong enough to restart a stopped heart. Caleb named the resident gecko who lived by the terrace door. "Professor Scales," he announced solemnly on day 1. He checked on Professor Scales every morning and every night. On day 3, we went to Manuel Antonio National Park. Caleb had been dreaming about this since that Christmas dinner, since he'd pulled on my sleeve and asked if we could see the wild monkeys. And standing on a trail in the park at 7 a.m. when a white-faced capuchin monkey dropped out of a tree, sat on a branch 3 feet away, and looked him directly in the eyes. The sound that came out of my son's mouth was not a word. It was something beyond words. Pure wonder. I took 16 photos. Every single one is on my wall. We took a cooking class in the town of Capos. Caleb wore an apron that hung to his ankles and made traditional ceviche and rice with beans under the guidance of a local woman named Esperanza who told him entirely seriously, "You have chef's hands. You feel the food." Caleb stirred that ceviche like he was diffusing a bomb. We watched the sunset from the beach on day 7. No resort pool, no swim-up bar, no curated experience. Just us and the Pacific and a sky that went from orange to violet to deep, impossible blue. Caleb held my hand and was quiet for a full minute. Then, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. $19,500 for 6 people, not a word of thanks. Around $2,800 for 2 people at Villa Serena, and every single minute was worth every single cent." After 3 weeks after we got home, here's where everyone landed. Linda didn't call once. No apology. No acknowledgement. What she did instead was tell her church circle that I'd stolen the family vacation out of spite. But the bank statements had already been photographed, forwarded, and discussed. In a small town, truth travels faster than a revised narrative. Helen and Rose quietly stepped back from the church committee they shared with Linda. Scheduling reasons, they said. Everyone knew better. Melissa sent one text message 2 weeks after the barbecue. "Can we talk?" I replied, "When you're ready to acknowledge what actually happened, all of it, yes." She didn't respond. I expected that. Frank called twice. The first time he apologized properly, not a vague sorry, a specific one. He named each thing he'd been silent about. The second time, he just asked about the trip. Did Caleb see the monkeys? I told him everything. We talked for nearly an hour. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my father. I left the door open for Frank. Not because he'd earned it. Because he was trying. Derek enrolled them both in financial counseling through their church. First time in their marriage, he sat down with their actual income and built a real budget. I heard about it through Gary, and I'll be honest, I was genuinely glad. Not for Melissa's sake. For Derek's and for their kids. Marcus, my coworker who got accidentally swept into the barbecue, texted me afterward. "I have never been to a more eventful cookout in my life. Are you okay?" We went out for tacos and I told him the whole story. He sat across from me, shaking his head slowly for about 45 minutes. "You're the calmest person I've ever met," he said. I would have flipped that coleslaw bowl. I opened a new bank account, sole signatory, no authorized users, no exceptions. I joined an online community for adults navigating controlling and financially exploitative family dynamics. Reading those threads was like finding a room full of people who spoke my exact language. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't the villain in the story my mother was busy telling. I was just someone who had finally stopped paying to be treated that way. I stopped writing checks for people who never asked if I could afford it. I stopped answering calls that began with, "I just need a quick favor." I stopped performing the role of the endlessly available, endlessly forgiving daughter who kept the peace by absorbing every cost, financial, emotional, and otherwise. And one Tuesday evening, about a month after we got home, I was sitting on the front porch watching the light go amber through the trees. Caleb came running out holding a piece of paper. A drawing from art class. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing on a yellow beach with blue water. A big orange sun above them. And in careful third-grade handwriting at the bottom, "My mom is my hero." He handed it to me the way kids hand you things that matter, quickly, with complete trust that you'll know what to do with it. I walked inside and pinned it to the refrigerator with a magnet right next to the photo of Caleb and the capuchin monkey from day 3 of our trip. The drawing and the photograph. Side by side. The boy and the monkey. The boy and his mother. Both of them grinning like they won something. Because they did. I didn't win this by being loud. I didn't win it by being cruel or dramatic or vindictive or by pulling some elaborate scheme designed to embarrass anyone. I won it by knowing exactly what I was worth and refusing, quietly, calmly, completely, to accept anything less than that. If you are the person in your family who covers every bill and gets uninvited from every table, hear me when I say this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to walk away with your dignity and your kid's hand in yours. That's not selfishness. That's not betrayal. That is the bravest, most loving thing you can do. For yourself. And for the people who are watching to see if you're finally going to draw that line. You are worth more than what you give. Don't you ever forget that. That's Sarah's story. But I know some of you have your own, and I know some of you are living it right now. If you've been the family payroll, the one who signs every check but never gets a seat at the table, the one who keeps the peace by absorbing all the costs, tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and you might be surprised how many people are nodding along beside you. If this story gave you even a little bit of courage to set a boundary you've been putting off for way too long, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I share stories like this every single week. Thank you for watching. Remember, your boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. and you hold the only key.